Hi everyone, this is Chuck Bruce doing a quick demo on an inlay bail. We're just doing the basis to give you an understanding of that. When the camera moves, we'll show you that in my advanced inlay class, we do both the pendant part, but we're also doing a handmade bail. And pendant part, we do like stone and stone and a couple other things, pieced work. The bail I learned originally from Jim Richardson. We're using in this one 24 gauge sheet. It's about 1 5/8 inch long and about 5/8 inch wide. But in this, you're making a custom bail. It can be as long as you want, can be as wide as you want. Several different things that we've got going on with this. We've got one that you can do a full inlay with. So we inlay stone all the way around that channel or inside that channel. We've also got one that has a break where you can inlay up to that break point to pull, from the pendant up to the bail. We also, one of the things I like is texture. In my line of work, a lot of people in the wearable thing fidget with their jewelry. If you have a textured element, adds a little bit more interest, a little bit more depth, and a little bit more bling in some ways. So you can do just a bail with just a roller print texture or a handmade texture, however you want, or it can just be plain, it's up to you. Another thing that we have done is then do the tiny cones or tubing for little stone cones. So this stone cone goes in this pendant. If I can do it with reaching over the table, and he ran away. So this will be inserted in there, and the pendant part is brain coral agatized with then a little bit of moonstone. Once that's finished, lovely piece, but it'll pull the eye up from the stone itself to the moonstone, so it makes some movement. So over here on the other side of the table, I have my 24 gauge sheet. What I actually did was a roller texture with just some scrubbing material. You can do it with sandpaper. If you do it with sandpaper, put some paper on each side so you don't change up your steel rollers. I have brass plates called texture plates or roller printing plates, but you can do it by using the edge of a hammer. You can do with a dapping set. You can do with a really aggressive wire brush. Those are just some quick and easies. The side rails for the one that I prefer now is using 16 gauge round sterling silver wire, about 3 inches each. And what I'm gonna do is on this, make a little diamond. Doesn't have to be real severe. And so I'm just putting a break point in where I'm wanting things to go. Now, in this, if you do both at the same time, you have a greater chance of matching up that break. And I've got enough eye that I did it without it, but I'm gonna go ahead and redo it just a little bit. So we are gonna make a diamond shape within this. Now, my wires are a little long, and that I will trim down, and I'll have to look at my measurements. It might have been 3 inches for the full piece. With this, then from there, I'm going to go ahead and solder this up. There's a couple tricks with that. These ends don't have to be perfect. I just want you guys to know that. We're gonna be rounding it off anyways to attach the jump ring that goes on the end of it. So go ahead and do this. It's always fun during demos, You're trying to chew gum and talk at the same time. It does not always as easy as it looks sometimes. All right, go ahead and get these cut off on the other end. With custom bails, what you're doing is adding an extra dimension to the work. They can take a little bit of time. They're not real difficult at all. So now that I've got my pieces of reasonable length, my wires will fit inside, just inside this plate. I might have to trim off just a little bit more. What we're doing is our bend point, our break point is at the very center. And so what we're wanting to do is make the diamond go that way. Could we do a square bail? Yes, there's no right or wrongs in any of this. That is what your aesthetic is. A tapered bail for me, I think is a little bit more elegant, but that's my preference. You know, again, at the end of the day, you're the designer, you're the artist. Do what really calls to you. We are going to be doing what is soldering, but it's a slightly different version because I'm using Prips Flux. Prips Flux is a combination of boric acid, 2/3, 1/3 borax, and 1/3 trisodium phosphate. It was developed by a university professor. It is a high heat flux or a long lasting flux. And I use hardwire solder for my soldering. And at the end of the day, I don't want the flux to burn off too quickly. My wires, I'm just going to go ahead and slide these back and forth on the scrubby. I'm just trying to give that underside just a little bit of teeth. I'm going to do the same for the other wire. Just to get a little bit of teeth in this. I know that these edges are going to be, you know, soldered on. So what I can do is just on those edges, do a little bit of teeth so that solder has some place for the flux to get into and to really adhere well. We're going to be moving over to the soldering station. So I'm turning my wires out, I'm turning the bottom of that plate up. I flux all sides. What that does is help reduce fire scale. And at the end of the day, that is one of the things for cleaner work is less fire scale. So Prips Flux, Cooper nail, Fire Stop by Stuller. Cooper nail you can get at Contente, and also one of the others that I'm drawing a blank on their name. They all act in the same way. You're adding a little bit of heat to evaporate out that moisture. What a lot of time happens when you put your flux on, and I'm go ahead before I put my wires on, is go ahead and coat that plate well with flux. So I have flux between the wire and that plate. And then I'm gonna put my wires on and then go ahead and flux once more. I like a heavy flux for my work. It just makes life a little easier. You know, one of the hard things to do is teach somebody how to, you know, get cleaner work. At the end of the day, what do you want? So I'm doing one more fluxing of this. What is beautiful about Prips or Firescoff or Cooper nail in this manner is once you've got everything fluxed up well, you should be able to move this without it coming apart. It actually has a glue face. I'm going to be doing hardwire solder, do some pieces on each side on the outside. They don't have to be large pieces. We're gonna make them flow, but because I'm out to that edge of the metal, I'm gonna make sure I have just a little bit of air so that it doesn't, you know, stop on me. These are solder tweezers. Very fine tip tweezers. They are just for solder. You do not want to use them when a piece is hot because they'll temper. You'll lose your temper on the steel. And so what they'll do is they won't be able to get in and place the solder real well. Now, you could also sweat solder this. I find that the solder doesn't really flow inside. If you wanted, you could use yellow ochre to go ahead and stop that solder from flowing. And then I'm trying to place my solder right up to that wire. I've got just a little bit of a trimmer today. Okay, so I've got my base plate, the wire set up to make this bail. I've got the texture tied up that'll be on the inside of this. What I'm going to do is just heat one end, get everything to flow. Now with hardwire solder, you get closer to a melting point, but you also have the high silver content. And at the end, what it does is you don't see all your seam lines as easily. So this is starting to flow. Pull it down, come over to the next side. When it starts to get hot, just go up. You know, you're the one in control of it. Everybody thinks I have to, you know, go to the soldering god, and so please, please, please. It's just like a conductor. You come in, you go out. And I tend to go up and down. I was taught that by a person that has a master's in metals. I'm there. It does not need to be, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. We are the ones that are doing this. But heat control, torch skills, are a learned experience. You know, the more you do it, the more you get in sync to it. I tend to do very large pieces. My inlay cuffs are usually about 1 ounce to 1.5 ounces to sometimes 2 ounces of silver. You're talking a mass of metal. So I use usually a larger flame than most people are comfortable with. So what I will need to do is pickle this, make sure that everything is playing well, it's all soldered good, which it looks like it is. We'll come right back once it's done pickling. So see you in a minute. Welcome back. So again, we're in the middle of making a handmade bail. Now this is a little wider than I normally would do. Again, in these things, you can make them as big and as small as you want. What I would do is a corresponding piece that is as wide. I'm using a handmade scribe that I made for myself. And where I need to saw off that plate, I am doing a line for the saw blade to have a chance to follow. It makes hand sewing a hell of a lot easier. So I've got this marked up, and then I will be sawing it out. Frame of choice is Potter USA. I know he's out of production right now. I don't know if he'll ever make it anymore. My blade of choice is Antelope. I just find it works better for me on the sawing. What a lot of people do is have their bench block, and it is just a smooth surface, and you're working against yourself. Andrea Jackson, a master of metals that I took from, talked to me about isolating motion. So when you're sawing, if you can isolate that motion, it makes life easier because you are not trying to hold it in place and also use the force to then go ahead and get it to move. Not move. Let me re-say that. So I've got a little piece of leather, gonna make my life easier, or try to make my life easier. You know how that goes. Always take your stool down so you're not quite as high. Use your thumb behind it to get a small start point. And then it's a matter of just nice and long strokes. Since I have that line to follow, it just makes it really easy to go ahead and get this sawed out. The hang-ups that you're hearing is hardwire solder. The blade doesn't always like to cut through hardwire solder, but having the channel makes life a lot easier. If you divot the side wires, don't worry about it. We're going to be cleaning those up, and I'll be showing that in just a minute. This side, I should have lubricated the blade again, and it's fighting me. So we'll do that before my last cut. There's days that things like this go really well in any of our lives. Other days it's kind of like, oh my God, what's going on here? So once I get this done, we're going to have jagged edges on all 4 sides. How do we clean that up? I use what's called a 3M unitized wheel. If you think of a really hard scrubby that can basically smooth out all the scratches. What I like about it, it is a bigger surface area, and it lets me divot less when I'm in the middle of doing this stuff. So this is what the edges look like for this. This is the 3M unitized wheel. So you can see it is a little broader side surface. So for cleaning this up, it is a softer way of removing material, but because it's not very thin, it doesn't divot in and take away just in one certain spot. The other thing that you can use is a file. You can use a sanding machine or sandpaper. You have to look at what tools you're comfortable with using and what processes you're comfortable using. This works for me, and in my life, sometimes time is money. I'm always playing catch up, and so things that make my life easier are things that I use. So again, the leather helps me go ahead and keep this in position. Always when you're using an abrasive, you're going to generate heat. Have it where you can quench it. I have a towel on my lap to pick up any water. So then I'm coming here, coming at a slight angle on this. Heating up, go ahead and quench. So this is a way, I don't know if we have a close-up on that. This is that way that edge looks now, just with the 3M wheel. Now on the back side, because of that, I'm gonna have a slight burr. What I wanna do is go ahead and soften that burr. So I have all 4 sides to do. Let me run through this real quick. You can see how quick it goes. Now it looks like I might have a tiny solder pit. We're gonna do 2 more solderings and be using hardwire solder for each of those. So we'll be able to flow and use that fill. That's one of the beautiful things about hardwire solder. Once you use it, it then becomes extra hard and you can keep using hardwire solder to keep moving forward. I'm gonna be forming this. What I like to use for forming is a pair of bezel making pliers. You can do it around a scribe, you can do it around a chisel handle, dopping stems, but for me this works good. Now it is going to leave some plier marks if I'm not really careful. So right now I am using this as a wire wrapping method. I'm using the steel block to help me go ahead and get this to come together. So with using a steel block, you get a little bit more bang for your money because you can get a little bit more pressure. Now, I could go to a smaller thing for an opening, but what I like is to have a good place for the chain to run through. Now this basically flattened out on me a little. Part of it, there was less mass because I was right to the edge of that. So I can also use the pliers to then go ahead and do some residual forming, which I'll do. And I will probably play with that after this is annealed, be easier to work. So I have my tips almost touching, and I'm gonna want them touching, but I will do that when I'm doing the heat, the soldering or the heat on it, because it'll anneal it down and be easier to go ahead and manipulate this. With what we've done already with the sawing and stuff, I have it pretty close at the moment. So that's gonna be my next step, is soldering up. So back to the soldering station. And as you see, I do talk to myself or make little thing noises, and I don't realize it. So thank you for bearing with me. It's funny. We all do things like that we're just not aware of until somebody points it out. Did you know you did this? No. What are you talking about? Let me grab a pair of pliers. I'll be right back. I love these tiny micro pliers. They're really good for doing things along this line. So I've got a little hardwire solder hook that I'm gonna go ahead and hang between these two things. First, I need to go ahead and prips up this whole thing. Again, prips is the flux that I'm using, long-lasting flux. I prefer to do my soldering seated. I've got progressive glasses, and it's a little better for my sweet spot if I'm seated. I also have low back issues and had a left hip, right knee replacement just 5.5 weeks ago. So, you know, you've got to take your body into account and what can I do to make things easier. With my solder tweezers, go ahead and place the solder and moving that back. And the solder decided he wanted to run away for a bit, so we're going to cut him another piece. As you can see, I've got my solder in a little bottle. I find it's easier picking up something that's standing up than trying to pick something off flat off the table. So I have the same with my picks. They're standing up. Now this is wanting to rock on me, the bail is. So what I can do is put something behind it like that. You can do it with that. I usually have a penny that I do, but I'll go ahead and just use the rocks right now. You can also cut a divot in the stone. What I do is the back part of a third hand, you know, to go ahead and get it so that it lets me have it sit in. These are really great for having things not move on you. I hesitated to touch that. I wasn't sure if he was cool. Always use the side of your hand, side of your finger. I tell anybody, you'll do it once and then you'll remember it and you won't do it again. So this solder, I'm bringing right in between these two guys, and I'll spin the block around in just a minute. It's one of those, I have to see it to place it, and then we'll show you the placement on it. And this is one that is fighting me, which is just a pain in the rear. Go ahead and stop it for just a minute. Sorry about that. My tweezers weren't having a very fine tip on the end, and so what it was doing was not allowing that solder to be picked up effectively. Since he's cool, I've already got flux on. I'm not going to damage the flux. I can actually hold it. These support mechanisms that you have to develop are just that. And then if it takes you a minute, it takes you a minute. So as you can see, the solder is between the 2 points. So I'm going to come in and heat. So you see how I'm holding my torch? It just makes it easier for me. So gentle heat, you're heating the whole body, and then you're concentrating on that tip. And as you're doing that tip, you then just put a little downward pressure. Now, if that doesn't do it, you can always do what's called stick soldering, where you have a piece of solder on a stick, bring it together, and just pull it towards you just a tiny bit, and then it actually solders up. That did it beautifully. Make it so you guys can see it. So we're all soldered together. You've got your two ends. Now that end is a little rough. We're gonna be blending that out. Yeah, don't worry about that. And you know, I tell people, this is not my best work. Again, trying to talk and do it. is what it is. It's a demonstration. When you are concentrating on your work, you do a better job without any other outside distractions. I've got my studio set up for me. I've got it how it grooves. I've got it how I like it. It just makes things a lot easier that way. We've got to go back in the pickle, let this pickle. We will then blend that in. I'll show you how to insert the jump ring and also show making that a nicer form from the interior roundness of that. See you in just a minute. Hi guys, welcome back. So I've got this out of the pickle. Could use just a little bit more pickling, but because of where we're at time-wise, we're gonna go ahead and move it through. So what I'm gonna do now is go ahead and just form on this. The other option I have, I talked about a dapping point. You can actually put it inside, and I've got to grab just a slightly smaller one. And you can actually form around that. You've got, dapping. It's fun when you try to draw a word and you can't find it. Transfer punch set. That you can actually use as mandrels on this. And so what I'm doing, because I have a close connection, if you have an open connection trying to form it, the ends are going to come apart. When you have a closed connection, you can form because it is attached. And so all I'm doing now, wood surface, I could do it just where it's, suspended. I am bringing down just a little bit of pressure to form it around that mandrel, around that steel. Because it is a complete circle, it is allowing me to do that without fighting me too much. If you didn't have, like I said, those two ends attached, it wouldn't let you do this. So as you can, I was told I don't need to do that. As you see, I have a better form on that, which is what I wanted. In any of this, take a critical eye to your work. If you don't think it is up to standard, do something about it. That is one that everybody has to give themselves a little credit in learning something new. There are some allowables in that, but if you can constantly look at, is this the best I can do at the moment? How can I make it cleaner? How can I up my game? You're gonna be 12 steps ahead of anybody else. So we're gonna go back to the 3M wheel. I'm just gonna do a general rounding on this. Kind of soften this just a little bit. So I'm trying to just take all those little sharp surfaces off. You're making it a little square. It doesn't have to be real square. What we're gonna be doing next is I've got a 1/8 16 gauge silver jump ring that is gonna be our carry ring for the bail. I prefer a heavier gauge for the carry ring because people tug down and you're going to have an open connection on the back side where the two pieces hang together. It makes it so that the jewelry lasts a lot longer. You have less problems. And if you have a client that is like my mother that's very hard on jewelry, you have less returns and less repair jobs. What I'm flipping to is a cutoff wheel. Cutoff wheels are just that. They're used to cut off material, usually steel. There are two different types. There is a thin, brittle stone abrasive, really great for doing small cuts, but because it is just the material itself, it likes to fracture or, break really easily. You have a second type that is a reinforced cutoff wheel. You've got the material and a netting that reinforces that whole surface. This can take a lot more punishment, can do a little bit more side-to-side motion. For this, because we want this ring to basically fit like this to the bail, we're cutting a channel for that ring to set in. This is a little thicker than the very thin one. Gives us a little bit more area to be able to work with. Cutoff mandrels you can find on eBay, on Amazon. They're not usually a standard mandrel. You get lucky sometimes, sometimes not. The 3M wheel has to have a cutoff mandrel because of the hole size. Your regular, normal, Dremel point, whatever, is not gonna work mandrel because of it needs a slightly bigger surface at the top. So I'm coming right here holding this is important. I've got this in my hand if I think I need to quench it, but then I've got my elbows in and I'm using things as a tripod so that I've got a really stable point to then create that channel. I tell people, don't worry, the jump ring is split right now. Don't worry about absolute placement on this because we're going to be resoldering this. You can always use your saw to cut out that opening later on. Again, where I want that surface to meet, green scrubby to scratch it up. Make sure that things are really nice and smooth on that. I'm gonna grab a different back point for myself to be able to do the security that I want on the other end. Okay, that's where being prepared and thinking everything through helps sometimes. We're gonna go ahead and do it, wing it. So, meet you over at soldering station. So the jump ring I want closed so that you know that you're straight. I'm gonna have to press everything up. You have to decide which one you want your top and bottom. You don't have to decide it really at the moment, but when you split that ring, you want that split part on the back side. So what I'm doing now is picking up this jump ring. I'll probably make sure that it's not real hot, put a little water on it. So I like good cross-lock pliers for things like this. You need to make sure they have the spring. If you've heated them and then quench it, they lose the spring. And of course, as it would have it, my ring just jumped away. Gonna be one of those days, which you laugh or you cry. This is a laughing time. Be right.
Welcome back.
So, yeah, Murphy's Law is always fun. So I've got a box of copper pennies, nickels. The pennies, if they're 1980 or before, they are a pure copper content that will not interact chemically with any of your materials. Beyond that, there are other metals in. What I'm doing, I've got that ring in a cross-lock plier. I am bumping up that cross-lock plier and then putting it up against this bail, lining where that channel is. Now, because of that, I needed to grab a longer brick. I'm also then behind this bail, putting a penny in the curved surface area to keep these two locked together. This is just setup. Setup takes a minute to make happen. Sometimes it goes really well. Sometimes you have to play with it just a little bit. Everybody goes through this. So don't beat yourself up if it takes a minute, going, my God, what am I doing, da-da-da-da-da. I am gonna crisp that joint area really, really heavy. That is your primary attachment point for that bail. The last thing you want to do is for that attachment point to fail. That's one reason for creating the channel. If we did not do the channel, if we did it just flat, when you've got a slight curved surface to a flat surface, it is gonna fail. It's gonna break off with time. One reason I also go a little heavier on the solder, hard wire solder can fill micro gaps, and also since it is so strong, because you're in a high 70s percent pure silver, you have more consistent metal, but you also have strength instead of other ingredients in there. Those numbers you can easily look up. I can never remember them, just like I can't remember faces, remember names, but I can remember your face 20 years later. So I just placed that solder hook over that. Now this, I needed to make that hook just a little bit more, instead of a U, a little sharper hook. These little chain nose, micro chain nose pliers are beautiful for doing this. If you don't want to do your finger, you can do it against a piece of wood, against a piece of steel. This is the way of using soldering to help you. If you prefer paste solder, you could. The bad thing about paste solder is solder and flux all together, ground up solder. It just takes so much more material and it can burn off really right away. I'm gonna restart this again. Since I have flux all over that, I do not need to put flux on the solder. I've got enough flux in that connection area. And then remember, you're the one in control of the flame. Now, your biggest part of the mass is gonna be on this outside. Hold on just a minute. Things shifted on me. There you go. Always do a last minute check. You just never know what happens. Vibrations are a bad thing when you're doing setups. And again, the smallest thing, like setting the solder, if you slightly knocked it and you didn't notice it, it'd give you issues. Your biggest part of the mass is on this part of the material, on the bale itself. That jump ring is not a lot of mass. So you don't want to bring the flame directly on that. And then you see that I'm coming in, going out. As I come in, the heat intensifies. As I go out, it actually then cools instantly. So what I'm doing is getting that to flow. I come from the side. It looks like that I'm gonna have to adjust that attachment area. Again, this is what it is. It's just gonna take a little bit of time for me to get that completely like I like it. Since it is hot, I've gotta be careful. The other thing is that since I fluxed it really, really well, I still have enough flux in that area. Now, if it was very dirty, meaning that I still didn't have a lot of flux, what I would need to do is go ahead and pickle it. Flux does not like to run on dirty surfaces. So let me have a chance to set this back up a little bit more appropriately. I always forget I make little noises when I do this. I just think it's really funny. What I am gonna do is just put a little bit more flux there and probably a little bit more solder just because it flowed and I want that anchor point to be really good. The flowing is all around in that area, so I do have solder. The reality is it would probably hold, but I would rather be a little over just from I don't want to say a safety standpoint, just from, craftsman standpoint. The last thing, I want to do is sell somebody a piece of work and have it break on them. And then they, say, well, is your work really all that quality or not? Anybody can actually have work break. I didn't flux that yet. You see what happens when I start talking? I forget things. So, the more you look at your engineering on these things, or your connection areas, or what metal gauge you're using, what you're doing is making it so that customer feels they have confidence in you. And we have to be proud of our work. If we're not, it's hard for, us to really engage a customer or even a family member going, that work is just so-so. I will say the work that you're not particularly proud of, one, I have found that even if you don't like a work, it usually is the one that'll sell first because you have customers that think it's fabulous. But if you have a piece that you don't think is up to your standard, you can always donate it, give it to a stranger. The amazing thing is they don't see what you see, and you've made somebody's day. So this is fighting me just a little bit, and so I'm gonna try to shift it in just like I did and get it to really anchor together. Just did. I'm happy with that. As you saw, I was holding the torch with my non-dominant hand. I'm right-handed. I was using the pick with my dominant hand, which I have more control. If you can teach yourself that, you'll take your soldering torch skills from here up to here. So since this was a soldering, we will need to pickle this. I will need to go ahead and adapt this just a little bit, line it up, but since it's soft, I'm able to do that. I'm just slightly a little out of torque, and since that jump ring moved in the crosslock tweezers, that's why. Once we get the pickling, we will then get this finished up and have you on your way. Thank you. Hey guys, welcome back. So what I'm going to do is line this up just a little better. I've got a really solid solder connection. The opening is on the back side, so I had left it enough space to keep that. Again, if this had soldered closed, not a big issue. What I want to do now is all the blending in these areas to make it look nice and pretty. And with that, there is a German medium Cratex wheel that I really like. What I've done is put a really narrow edge on that, and all you do is hold the wheel against a piece of sandboard or sandpaper on the table, and you can get this nice, truly sharp edge, and as it goes away, you can just resharpen it. A trick that I learned from Michael Boyd, which is just really a great one on that. So, a little bit of room. I've got, again, my arms in, and I'm just blending out these areas. When you have a potential for sharp areas, you have a potential for them catching or people just thinking, oh, this doesn't feel right. So by blending that all together, you make things look a little better. Now, these side seams, because of the resoldering, has opened up just a tiny bit. So all I need to do is blend these back. I'll look on both sides. Again, because I'm going and stopping, I'm not raising heat. If I'm raising too much heat, I'll go ahead and quench this. Looks good, except for one little area, which I want to go ahead and bring back down. I'll come across those top rails really lightly, probably with the 3M wheel. But here is the bail that is done for today. Thank you for joining us. Down at William Holland, visiting friends, doing a donation, having some really great food. I'll see you guys in the future. Thank you.